to the link in the chat and help out Marco with notes. And that also brings us to the official start of this meeting. With people having come in, welcome to the CBOR meeting of the online IETF 110. This is an IETF meeting. That means that the note well applies both here and in the accompanying venues. If there's anything unclear about this, please ask about it, or please read through it, and especially with IPR stuff, just ask about it before we get into a situation that might otherwise be difficult. That being said, next slide, please. This meeting will be recorded. We have the Jabber session on your left side. We use a queue, so if you have something to comment on, just please use the hand button. It will be 2 slides further along, I think. And when then later we are in the discussion part, please feel free to just unmute your audio if you're jumping back and forth between discussion points. 1 slide back, please. As for today, we have, I'm confusing myself, sorry. As for today, this is the last meeting where Francesca is joining us as a working group chair, given that she is now taking on the role of the area director. Thanks for working with me, and congratulations on the AD role. And thanks for staying with us in that same role. Speaking of staying with us, she's taking the position from Barry. Thank you for working as an area director, and thanks for coming back as a working group chair for the upcoming meetings.
Happy to. Glad to join you guys. Bye.
On the agenda for today, we have several active working group documents, the first of which I'll just talk about briefly because it's not really our working group, a topic of our working group anymore, but has been recently passed on to the IESG. We'll then go through the additional operators, the packed CBOR plans, and the 2 new working group documents that Michael has brought in on file magic, file recognition, and network addresses. And from there, we'll continue with so far an individual document that is the time duration and period from Carsten. Then Kio will tell us about a few things about how we might do ordered maps in CBOR, and we can discuss especially the topic of the relevant tag lengths, and that will also be the introduction point to other notable tags that Carsten will talk about briefly. If then time allows, we can still look into any other business, especially the CBOR freezer. Comments on the agenda, points that we still should take up?
I have 2 more slides that I can show after the freezer.
That's the AI 28 thing, I suppose? Yep. It's already on the extended agenda. Yep, thank you. If there's no more comments, I'll jump right into the topic of OID. This document has recently passed the working group last call, and I've completed the Shepherd write-up that Francesca has been as kind as to largely prepare. As the working group last call completed without any objections and with good support and reviews, this is now in the hands of the IESG, and comments there are already coming in. There's one potential issue that we're still looking out at, that is that CHOR Leonard hasn't replied to the IPR question yet, but there's still ample time until this really needs to be done completely. And until then, and in general, I don't expect that there will be large complications. It's more procedural matters.
Yeah, by now, any submarines that she might have will have surfaced, so I don't think we have a problem there.
Yeah. if there's no other question, if there's no other points on that, Francesca, please please go to Carsten's slide, and we can start with the topic of CDI control. Carsten.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So, yeah, this is an old acquaintance which has been around for a while. It does three things. It defines some computed literals using .cat and .plus. It defines how to use ABNF in a CDDL model, and it defines .feature. And we were kind of done with this, but we hadn't got any feedback from implementation experience. So I finally broke down and actually generated an implementation, so we can now play with that. And the main reason why you want to have an implementation is that you will encounter surprises, and that's exactly what happened here. Most of us have completely forgotten that ABNF is indentation hostile. I put the word sensitive on the slide, but it's really indentation hostile. And you really want to use indentation in your CDDL specification, so you understand the difference between the CDDL rules and the ABNF rules, because CDDL has been modeled after ABNF, and it's really easy to confuse the two if you don't have some visual clue. So the indentation you might put into some string literals to feed to the ABNF operator. That gets in the way because ABNF doesn't allow you to have any indentation except on continuation lines. And we had a brief discussion whether ABNF maybe can be fixed, because implementations are essentially all including some mechanisms to get rid of such indentation. But yeah, we decided maybe it will take too long to update this internet standard. So we decided to instead put something into the control operator draft. And now we have, beside the cat, a dedenting cat, which was briefly called bad, but then it was called dead cat. And then people said they would prefer a vegetarian option here. So we didn't use dead cat, but abbreviated this to .det, which, by the way, is a comic figure that people of my age are rather familiar in Germany. Anyway, so with this little addition, it's actually possible to write the live cat. Yeah, that's still not vegetarian, so I know. So with that, it's actually possible to have the examples that have been in the document before but didn't compile with the implementation. And I think we are essentially done. Next slide, please. So the implementation status, as I said, is the entire draft is implemented in the CDDL tool. About half of it is implemented in the tool from Andrew Weiss, but I think he hasn't had much time to actually follow through on his promise to put in ABNF there as well. And I took the .NET proposal and generated a -03 before we got a lot of discussion in the group, so we can back this out if we don't like that. But I think it's good to have one document that looks like what we would actually send to the ISG. So the next step is either to get pre-working group last call reviews, or to do a working group last call to finish this document. So sometimes it's better to have pre-reviews. Sometimes it's easier to get them when you actually issue a working group last call. There is no substantive difference here. It just potentially means we will have a second working group last call.
just to get a general feeling, how many here have read or implemented an earlier version of this document, given that -03 is quite new? Kind of showing hands briefly would help. Hank? Okay, that's two. Okay.
So people are asking, how do we show hands? I think you can just join the queue.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we don't need to go through the whole tool.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to have a bit more feedback on the mailing list as well on this, because that's so far that's not terribly many people. But generally I don't hear any loud complaints either. So unless something comes up on the mailing list, I think that this is what you propose sounds like a way we can continue on.
So do we solicit pre-working group last call reviews, or do we hear from a few people and then go into working group last call right away?
I think we don't get we don't get feedback in the mailing list that we can solicit reviews by starting the working group last call. Okay. And then we'll expect more reviews then.
Thank you.
What do you think, Christian?
Yeah. Which then brings us to the next topic, which is Carsten again on packed CBOR.
Yes, next slide, please. So we had a couple of discussions in interims that led us to add suffix packing. So far, we only had prefix packing and full shared item packing. And we added an example, the example from 2017, when this actually was written up for the first time. And what's missing right now is more details on the setup side. So we know how to decompress or unpack packed CBOR data item if we have set up tables, but we don't have the whole gamut of possible approaches for table setup yet. So the basic idea was to do a basic version of that and provide extensibility points so people can add their way of doing this if needed. So one question that came up is, do we actually want to have something that could be called circumfix packing? And actually, I had an older draft which I wrote for LPWAN that has this in some form. So right now, I don't really have a very crisp use case, but we certainly could add tags like that later. So right now, the unpacking part of CBOR packed really is essentially a few tag allocations and a few simple item allocations. So we are now in the familiar position that we have a draft that already mostly works, maybe needs a little bit more details on the table setup, but we need to get more experience with using it. I have an implementation from the 2017 sprint, but that really needs to be adapted to what we have now, and probably needs some further implementation work. So we are in the same position we were with control draft months ago. And also today it became, in the dispatch group, it became obvious to me that we have to have some additions for streaming packing. So how do you run a streaming application where while you are streaming CBOR data item, you notice that there is something that comes up repeatedly and would need a table entry. I think that can be added later, but that's certainly something to look at on the implementation side. So that's where we are at the moment. It would be really great to get another implementation apart from mine. It's very easy to write the unpacker, but the packer is essentially an unbounded complexity problem. You can always come up with a solution that's slightly better than what you have. So you need to put in some restraint when implementing this. So that would be a good thing, and of course, playing with the implementations we have would be good once they are out there.
Brief procedural question: other than Suit, who have done something different now anyway, is there anything that puts a timeline on this document?
Well, my point of view is that there are a lot of JSON-based protocols that could easily be converted to CBOR and get significant improvements from that if we had something like packed out there. So to me, it's really as soon as possible and not wait for a really strong use case to come up.
Mm-hmm. Hank?
Yeah, this is now not only a show of hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So especially working on CBOR-based protocols and some emerging ones, that is the benefit here, I think. The story we can tell is when someone is coming from a string-laden protocol, and these strings tend to be repetitive to some extent. The procedures here in PACT are basically the solution to then really make use not only in the scaffolding of CBOR that is more concise, but also the values that you inherit from the old world. And I think that's really addressing this issue here. So that's why I think Carsten is right with saying we don't need a lot of proof. This makes a lot of sense by itself.
Christian, with my chair hat off, if we look into making this useful for JSON, for documents coming from JSON, I think that there will be a case where there's the temptation to recreate the original JSON by deferring things to the CBOR packing, which is to keep string identifiers where we would regularly use integer identifiers, and then let the CBOR packing do its magic. I don't have a clear opinion on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or we should encourage this or not, but we should be aware of this.
Brandon, go ahead.
I know that Suit has already been referenced as having done something different, but I just want to say again, I really wish that this had been available when Suit was drafted, because it would have made life much easier. So my vote is as soon as possible, because if we get to the next version of Suit, for example, I'd like this to be around and stable.
Thank you. Carsten, anything to add to this?
Yeah, I'm aware of this little danger of people using their JSON-based protocols unchanged instead of adapting them to CBOR. But on the other hand, maybe that's exactly what we want them to be able to do. So it really depends on whether your working environment is really so constrained that you need to take out the last byte. Then probably you want to have integer labels. But if what CBOR PEG can do for you is good enough, why do another data model when instead you can just have the pegging engine do the work?
Right, thank you. Any more comments on the topic of packing?
Well,
So
this would be.
Go ahead, Carsten.
This would be a good time to ask who's going to implement this and who's going to provide reviews.
Fair point. Thanks for thank you. Who is going to implement this? Who could write a review? Thank you, Michael, for offering to review.
And
thank
Hank
you,
as
Hank.
well. And Russ Housley.
Excellent.
And Brendan. Great. Anybody who is planning to implement this?
Well, I am.
Yes, additionally
one.
to you, Carsten. You already mentioned that you have, and Alexei also will review.
The nagging we can provide, and Q2.
This is great.
Okay. With that many reviews, I'm also positive that at least someone will be tempted to just use it from the point of having reviewed it already.
John, and great, we have this all for the minutes.
With that, we are pretty much on time to proceed on to the documents that are new to the working group or newly adopted, being FileMagick. Michael, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Michael Richardson. So these were adopted last week, I guess, after a presentation in one of the virtual interims in February. I came across this as a need as I was converting a bespoke protocol. Well, next slide, please. Actually, it's all on the slide. So I was converting a bespoke protocol that involves passing C structures across a thing, across an IPC, and also storing them on disk as part of a unit test case system. And I'm converting it to CBOR, and I kind of really wanted to know what they were. And it also came out of the discussion that we were having in COSI about the various different kind of containers for CRL-like things or public keys or private keys. And my observation is that the PKIC space, it's a bit of a, no one's quite sure what extensions to use for what files. And a lot of the time you don't necessarily get a clear idea of what's going on. And you don't necessarily want to leave your private keys world readable so you can find out that they are in fact the private keys. This is where it came out of. Next slide, please. And actually, the other part of this was that I realized that as you have pieces that you are constructing and a source code tree, and you may be incorporating the CBOR into your source code as an object that you're going to send, that you may also like to know in your source code what is what. Without actually necessarily wanting to transmit it. And so this was evolved. There's a discussion on the list about this, and a CBOR sequence was suggested. Next slide, please. And so I wrote the first version with a CBOR sequence. The discussion subsequent during the adoption call was that we would like to have a CBOR sequence and a straight CBOR tag. And so the document now does that. Next slide, please. So in the case where you have a CBOR tag and you wrap your object, then you start with the CBOR tag 55799, which Magic file already knows is CBOR. And then you allocate a 4-byte tag number from the first come first served area, and you put that afterwards, and then you wrap your CBOR. And so this here is the one that I allocated to my project, which was OpenSwan. So if you decode this is in the file, it says OPSN in the file. Next slide, please. So the other version of this is that you have a CBOR sequence. And so we need a new tag. The proposal is 55800. So that's one above the previous one, and it would seem to have all the properties that we need it to have with respect to Unicode, UTF-8, UTF-16 type things. And in this case, with your CBOR sequence, you need to wrap the tags around something. And so you wrap it around the byte string BOR, which happens to have 3 characters long, which happens to encode as a C. And so the bytes 9 through 12, or I guess 8 through 11 of your file, counting from 0, are actually the letter CBOR. So if you dump the file, you will see the word CBOR in it, which may suggest to you that if you have some unknown thing, that maybe applying a CBOR decoder would be a good idea. This is a CBOR sequence, and it's 12 bytes long. And so if you don't wish to transmit this over your network protocol after having read it from the file, then you advance 12 bytes. It's always 12 bytes. You can mem compare it if you want. And then you start there, and then you have your object as it is. So those are the 2 different versions. Next slide, please. So you get what you want. I created for my thing a file output that did the right thing, and it worked great. I actually delved into the file program's CBOR decoding logic, and it's a little more complicated than I think it ought to be, but I not really our concern. Next slide. I think that's the last slide. Yeah. So I guess one of the questions is whether or not we should allocate this 55800 as a working group early allocation, or whether I should simply ask the IANA to pointing at this document to please go through the right review and allocate it, since it's in a space that could go either way. I think it would be cleaner if it was an early working group early allocation, but it could go either way. It doesn't matter.
Working group early allocation sounds like something that, in my opinion, we should do more often anyway. So that would be a good starting point. Comments from Carsten, please.
Yeah, we cannot do early allocation here because you only can do early allocation on things that would IETF would need IETF review to be allocated. But in this case, it's an FCFS space, so we should just go ahead and request that allocation for this draft, like today.
Yeah. Okay, I'll do that at the end of the working group.
So let me add that I didn't think much of this, the idea of generating this draft, but I really like what we have now, and I think that that's just a very, very small piece of really best current practice that we could use in all of our little CBOR protocols.
Thanks, Carsten. We continue on to the next document. No other questions?
If there's no I do have one question that I maybe didn't just get precisely from your presentation. is there anything to be really decided between the proposed hybrid solutions, or is this just
both are
both will be
proposed
useful?
now? Yeah, both are proposed. That was the discussion during the adoption, was that people felt they wanted both. They were like, well, why are you using a sequence when I just want a tag? And my content what originally for why I thought that was a good solution that was proposed in earlier discussion was that it allows you to tag it sanely in the file without actually making it mandatory that you are transmitting it across the wire. So while removing, 8 bytes of tag is easy to do if you speak CBOR, if actually what you're doing is you have a somewhat CBOR ignorant program who's simply loading something and transmitting it because it's let's call it a CBOR certificate or something else that goes in another protocol, or is being converted into a byte string for another CBOR protocol, then maybe you don't actually want to open that up. Maybe there are also signature issues about what you've signed there, and so the reasonable thing would be that the CBOR sequence would be something that's easy to cleave off. You just take off 12 bytes and you know exactly what they are. And if they don't match, then it's the wrong file.
Thanks. And as no one else has raised their hand in between, yes, please go ahead with the IPv6 and 4 addresses.
I lost screen sharing, so just give me a second. Just crashed.
Oh no.
That should be back.
Okay, so the other document, again, while converting things, I needed to have IP addresses in my process, and I support v4 and v6, and I thought, well, I should have a tag for that. In the GRASS protocol, which is not yet an RFC, but any hour now, had the same problem, and it was too bad we didn't think of doing that at the time. There, so next slide, thank you. So tag 260 and 261 is in the IANA registry. And I thought, oh, there must be something there. And I looked at this, and I was kind of dissatisfied with this for a couple of reasons. I didn't like the fact that it also supported Ethernet, that it implied the version number by the size of the thing, which I thought was potentially quite wasteful if you are, transmitting /32 prefixes or something like this. And then I read the 261, and I didn't understand the description at all as to how to make this into a prefix at all. So both of these were allocated by, I guess, document required, and the document is a Wikipedia, a wiki entry in GitHub. So I just thought it wasn't well enough documented. 261, I didn't like it, and so I needed prefixes as well as stuff. So I said, I bet I'm going to have to do something one or the other. Next slide, please. So these are essentially the proposal that's there. There will be 2 tags, one for v6 and one for v4. And the one for v6 has a byte string array, and the prefix has an array containing an integer, which is the prefix length, and then a byte string with as many bytes as the prefix as you care about. In both cases, trailing zeros may be omitted. So you may omit as many zeros on the right as you like. And for prefixes, this is typically many. So often for a 64-bit prefix, you will omit at least 8 bytes to the right because they're considered 0. And if you look at this one, you realize that there's only 48 bits present in this 64-bit long prefix because the next 16 bits are 0. So they're omitted, so that's good. So next slide, please. And so the same thing for IPv4, if anyone still uses that stuff with a different tag. And again, you omit trailing prefixes. Next slide. So I thought about, do we want to actually do we want to be able to apply this to arrays of addresses or prefixes? I don't personally have a great need for that. I don't need to pack thousands of prefixes into a network kind of thing and do something with them. I would be happy with just putting the tag on each one, particularly if it's not too long. But if someone else has that need, what I would see is that this could be accommodated within the same tag by just saying, oh, look, it's an array, and then you could do that. But I'm not personally interested. So if you want to do this, then I would expect someone to kind of stick handle it a little bit. And would like to do an early allocation. Is a 1+1 tag justified for this? So that would be a 2-byte tag. 260 and 261 are in that space. And if so, I'd like to allocate as soon as possible. Next slide. I think that's it. Yeah. And then there's a notable tags document, which it was mentioned that we could merge together, but well, one way or the other, I don't care. As long as the early allocation happens already, because I don't want to wait. Questions?
Carsten?
Okay. 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 I will send the request to IANA to send the request to us. Okay, so in my code, the prefix consists of an array, a number, and then reading address with trailing zeros and noting what the prefix length is expected. So to me, it's common code, so it's free. Secondly, I think that decoders need to have some instructions as to what to do if there are bytes missing. And if that's dropped, that's okay. But one way or the other, they need to be told what to do if that's happening. So I think implementing the trailing zeros on the receiver is not so terrible. And if encoders don't drop them, that's okay. It's okay to not drop the trailing zeros. I don't feel strongly about this, by the way. Okay.
Brief question from me again with chair hat off. On the topic of the existing existing tag 260, do you intend to add some compatibility statement that will semantically equate the newly created tag with a portion of that 260 tag, or would those be really up to the application to support either one, both, or none of them?
I would think that anyone defining a CBOR protocol based on this would say, and you will use new tag or you will use old tag, and I don't think they're interchangeable.
Thanks. Carsten?
Yeah, so that's really the job of the notable text document we'll get to in a couple of minutes to generate and to hold explanations on how these tags actually work together, or in this case don't work together, because we don't expect them to turn up in the same environment. I would prefer to keep the actual tag definitions very crisp, so implementers only get that information they need to implement this. And if they actually need a tour guide through the world of tags, that's what the notable tags document could add to this.
Sounds good to me. In terms of document reviewing, which is something that will come up, who has plans to implement or review this? I see Carsten. I take this as a show of hands. Okay, that we'll have to get a bit more of active participation also on the to finalize this eventually. But I think we can
Alexei.
we have a good way to continue from here.
Alexei also in the chat for the minute.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Michael. I'd thus like to hand back to Carsten for the topic of time format.
Sorry, I lost the screen again.
Carsten, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
So this is another old acquaintance. Next slide, please. So this has been around for a while, and actually it's in active use. So since this is a tag from what used to be the FCFS space, it no longer is FCFS space, but at the time it was FCFS. It's allocated, and people are using that. But now we have some additional requirements. So one thing that we added was timescale indication. The draft already hinted that this is about to happen, but I think we now understand what we want to have there. One can boil the ocean there, but we came up with a pretty simple thing that's probably sufficient for most applications. And we added clock quality, uncertainty, and guarantees to address specific use cases. So this is about the time tag itself. And the other thing that was open in the previous versions was actually defining a representation for durations and periods. So duration is a time delta, like 5 seconds, and a period is an interval. So it's like the start of the meeting up to 5 minutes into the meeting. That would be a time period. So those are now defined. Actually, the time period looks a little bit different than it used to. So we will need to ask IANA to actually update the registration for that with respect to the data type assumed, but I think that's a worthwhile change to make. So there is no implementation experience with duration and period yet, but it's written up so people can start using it. So at this point, I'm not in a particular rush moving this forward. On the other hand, there are protocols over there in the REDS context that could use a slightly more powerful time tag. So if there is, if we see that documents that could use this become ready for approval, we might want to finish or at least snapshot this document as well. So that's my status, and I'm waiting for input.
Comments on the document or questions that could be answered right now? So there's been quite a bit of Henk?
Yeah, maybe only the obvious things here. Hi, this is Henk. Sorry. So yeah, I'm working, of course, on items that direly need this, but I think, for example, we have protocols here in the IETF already that go beyond the typical annotation that this is a POSIX timestamp, or that this is an standard string time. And so I think that's these the attributes Carsten is bringing it are optional, but they really help in practice when you want more information about your time. And everybody is coming back to not only me, but sometimes me, and is asking, how do I phrase my timestamp if I need this additional information? And this goes over and over again. So this is just a speaking from experience, and just as a side comment, that this is really useful when you can cherry pick your kind of fraction, your resolution, and other attributes you want to attach to your time value. And so that's just a comment.
Thank you. More comments? So there's been quite a bit of discussion also on earlier versions of this on the mailing list. So given that this was announced, and I still think this is a good idea, I'd like to ask you for a hum for the adoption of this document into the CBOR working group. You should see the raise hand now. Please use the tool here, not the queue, unless you want to say something really.
Yes, it's in the top.
The yellow thing in the top.
But okay, thank you. So I'm seeing 11 hands from the raised here, which is, given that we're only 30 participants, quite a bit. Just to check for the opposite question, any opposition to you having this in the working group? Okay, hands are demonstratively staying down. Thank you. So there will be another mail on the topic on the mailing list, but this looks pretty good towards becoming a working group document. Thank you. Before we go to notable tags, which are in the sequence of slides, pretty much the next one, I'd like Kio to tell us about the topic of ordered maps, which is something that has not really been an IETF activity, but he has been kind enough to come here and present the work that is so far a document that would just register in the specification requirement section, but would could still profit from discussion here. Thank you for coming here. Kyo, floor is yours.
Okay, thanks very much. So I'm Kyo Smallwood. If you skip to the second slide, so I'm maintainer of the CBOR-2 Python library, originally written by Alex Gronholm in Finland. And I submitted a giant patch that implemented the deterministic encoding back when it was called canonical. And he asked if I wanted to maintain the library, so I accepted. It now has like a C backend and other nice features. Next slide, please. So what we're talking about here is like a CBOR map, but in Python, there is something called an ordered map, which is a key to value mapping. It behaves just like a hash table or an associative array, but the insertion order is important. The benefit of this is that it gives you efficient iteration over all items, and in Python at least is fairly compact. Next slide, please. So yeah, like I said, in Python, it's the ordered dict class. An implementation detail of Python's built-in dict is that it shares the same underlying data structures. Originally, that was purely coincidence, but since I think Python 3.8, that has been documented behavior in that the built-in dict preserves insertion order. But the difference that ordered dict has is that it's got some extra methods that allow you to move things around. And also, when you're comparing for equality, the order is important, whereas for the original dict, it's not important. Next slide, please. Similarly, in JavaScript, there is a map type, which allows extended key types, similar to how you can use like a Python tuple as a key. You can do a similar thing with JavaScript's map. Allows better iteration over the keys than the built-in object. And I didn't know this before I wrote this presentation, but it's possible to get key collisions with the object's prototype. Next slide, please. So in Ruby, the hash is actually ordered by default since 1.9. But it's not used for equality comparisons. So if you were using this in Ruby, it would be up to the author whether you felt that the order of your hash map was important. Next slide, please. So this originally came to my attention when a user of our library opened an issue saying, hey, when I serialize ordered dicts, they just get serialized as type 5, which is just a plain map. And if you're using a deterministic encoding, then it reorders those keys, so the original information is lost. It also means that when decoding, it becomes a plain dict when instantiating the object. And so he requested, a way to always decode maps as ordered dicts. But I suggested that we use a tag for it instead, so that we could communicate to others that the order of this is important. Next slide, please. So for us to consider is, how often will this be used? Currently, we're proposing tag 279, which is a 1+2. And I wrote a spec for it under my GitHub handle, Sikenre, which you can view there. I also want to mention this is generally a feature of interpreted, high-level languages. I think the only compiled language that I've seen that has this thing is maybe C++ and perhaps NIM as well. This was also merged with a similar proposal from Joe Hildebrand to handle JavaScript maps with non-string types and where order was important. So to kind of improve on tag 259, which has already been accepted. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Gio. Questions, comments, especially as to the tag length that would make sense here, and to use cases in the constrained area.
I see a question in the chat about duplicate keys, and duplicate keys are not supported. This has otherwise the same semantics as a map.
Mm-hmm. Another comment says, Michael, 1+1 seems fine. Carsten?
Yeah, so we have had, in the last 7 years, we have had various requests, both for ordered maps and for ordered multi-maps, and we never followed through on these. And maybe it's time to finally do this. And I actually think we need both. Ordered multi-maps are really needed when you have a traditional TLV structure and you are trying to represent this in a CBOR world in an unchanged way, because TLVs are usually allowed to be repeated, and then you have the multi-map case. And ordered maps are useful in a lot of environments where you actually want to have deterministic results, but not necessarily in the way that the reordering done by CBOR's deterministic encoding is providing. So, for instance, in SDF, we have definitions of properties, and these properties are very often in a specification that you look at, that is manually generated, ordered from most important to ancillary or in some way. And right now there is no way to actually preserve that. So that's one example where ordered maps come in. So I vacate my slot here so Jeffrey can say something.
Okay, thanks, Karsten.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
This seems like it would fit in certain places in the web packaging spec. I'm not sure that we would actually switch to it because we're currently using ordered maps and making that work. But it seems like a useful thing to have around.
Thank you. Comments on anything on the tag length that would seem meaningful to you? Hey, we're running out of time right now, but I see one more +1 for 1+1 tags. We had on the agenda originally the notable tags as well, that would need to move on to an interim. But we will reinstate interims after this IETF. So I'm looking forward to the discussion there. Francesca, handing over to you.
Yes, just wanted to remind everybody that we have scheduled interims, and I wanted to say thank you to everybody who participated. I really enjoyed working with you all, and I will still be around as a responsible area director, but yeah, it's really nice. So I just wanted to say thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And we're done. Thank you for joining today. Thank you, Christian, and thank you, Marco, for the minutes.
And see you all back at back in gather time. Bye.
Bye.